She wore holes in her slippers walking to a market where she was never allowed to buy anything. Every morning, long before the sun painted the sky with light, she was already awake, already walking, already invisible. People passed her by without a second glance. No one bothered to ask her name. Yet, within a single season, that same name would be spoken in every corner of the village. This is the story of Jesira, the girl who was buried under the weight of another person's cruelty and still found a way to bloom. Jesira was born in a small village called Edenmoor, a peaceful settlement surrounded by tall palm trees, red earth roads, and wide fields of cassava and maize. Not far from the village flowed a quiet river that glowed like gold every evening when the sun began to set. Her mother, Eva, was known across the village not for riches but for kindness. She prepared Jesira every morning to go to the village school. If a neighbor had no food, Eva shared what little she had. She also fed children as though they were her own children. If a child fell sick, she would sit beside them through the night, comforting their mothers and singing soft songs until morning came. She was the kind of woman people remembered long after she was gone. And she was gone far too soon. Jesira was only 9 years old when a terrible fever took her mother during the harmattan season. That night was cold and silent. By morning, the only warmth left in the house was what Jesira could gather from her own 2 trembling hands. Her father, Amosit, couldn't believe his beloved wife had just passed away. He held Jesira tightly, crying bitterly. Amosit was a carpenter known for building strong doors, tables, and roofs for houses across the neighboring villages. He loved his daughter deeply, but grief can weigh heavily on even the strongest hearts. After Eva died, Amosit became quiet and distant. The laughter that once filled their small home slowly disappeared. He often sits lost in thought, remembering his beautiful wife. 6 years later, after Jesira has completed her secondary school, feeling lonely and overwhelmed, Amosit remarried. Her name was Mirabella. She arrived with her 2 daughters, Philo and Mentri, bringing with them large boxes of clothes and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but slowly, the atmosphere inside the house began to change. Mirabella did not shout or throw things the way cruel people sometimes do in stories. Her cruelty was quieter and therefore more powerful. She moved through the house as if everything belonged to her. Her daughters received the best portions of food at dinner. Jesira, however, was given new responsibilities. Her chores doubled. She woke before dawn to sweep the compound, fetch water from the village well, cook breakfast, and tend to the small vegetable garden behind the house. Her bedroom was moved from the main house to a small room beside the kitchen that always smelled of firewood and smoke. Amosit noticed some of these changes, but he never noticed enough. And Jesira learned to survive the way many quiet people do, by becoming useful. She cooked meals before anyone else woke up. She mended torn clothes under the dim light of a lantern late into the night. She carried pots of water from the river, and she did all the household tasks when Mirabella could not be bothered. But Jesira had one secret refuge: books. At the village market, there was a small roadside shop owned by an elderly woman named Dottie. Dottie often received old books from traders passing through the region. Seeing Jesira's curiosity, she began lending the girl books one at a time. Through those pages, Jesira traveled far beyond her village. She read about cities she had never seen and people whose lives were completely different from her own. And through those stories, she began to believe that the world might be bigger than the life she was trapped in. Jesira was 21 when tragedy struck again. Her father had traveled to repair the roof of a church in another village. While walking high above the ground, the wooden scaffold collapsed beneath him. He did not survive the fall. The news reached Edenmoor on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. By Thursday, Mirabella had already begun rearranging the house as though Amosit had never lived there at all. Jesira's grief was complicated. She mourned the father who had once held her hand when she was small, and at the same time, she struggled with the pain of knowing he had never truly protected her. She cried beside the river at sunset, but never in front of Mirabella.
Without her father, the small protection she once had disappeared completely. Jesira was no longer treated as a stepdaughter. She was not even treated like a servant. She became something worse, someone invisible. Meanwhile, Philo and Mentoring wore jewelry that had once belonged to her mother, laughing loudly as if it had always been theirs. Jesira said nothing. Silence had become her strongest shield. Every year, the village held a grand harvest festival in the palace of the king called Edenmoor. People traveled from other villages to attend.
There were musicians playing talking drums, dancers performing under colorful lanterns, villagers selling roasted corn, and competitions that drew crowds from across the region. That year, Mirabella and her daughters were going to attend the royal celebration at the palace. She told Jesira not to go. Jesira was left behind to clean the house and prepare meals for their return. After Mirabella and her daughters set off that afternoon, something unexpected happened. Dottie arrived at the compound carrying carefully wrapped old clothes. Inside the wrapped old clothes was a beautiful dress that had once belonged to Dottie's daughter, who had passed away many years earlier. The dress was red and beautifully sewn. It fit Jesira perfectly. Jesira hesitated, her mind filled with doubts. What if Mirabella found out? What if people laughed at her? What if she did not belong there? But then she remembered her mother's kindness, the story she had read, and the quiet strength that had carried her through years of hardship. So she put on the dress. The festival was more magnificent than she had imagined. Lanterns lit the palace grounds like stars falling to earth. Music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the courtyards. Jesira wandered quietly through the crowd, observing everything with the curiosity of someone seeing the world for the first time. That was where Prince Emmanuel saw her. The prince had slipped away from the crowded palace hall for a moment of fresh air. He noticed Jesira standing near the garden wall, reading a small book she put in her purse and had brought with her. Curious, he approached her and asked what she was reading. Jesira answered without realizing who he was. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour. They spoke about books, about the quiet beauty of village life. They laughed about so many things, and Jesira couldn't remember when last she laughed this hard. Strangely enough, she felt safe with Prince Emmanuel. Jesira spoke honestly, something the prince rarely experienced among nobles. At night, they fell in love. It was love at first sight. When a palace guard arrived and addressed him as Your Highness, Jesira suddenly understood who he was. Embarrassed, she quietly thanked him for the conversation and slipped away before he could stop her. But Prince Emmanuel could not forget her in the red dress. For 2 weeks, he quietly searched for the mysterious girl in the red dress. He disguised himself as an ordinary man and set out to find Jesira. Moving through the busy marketplace, he approached different traders, carefully describing her appearance and asking if anyone had seen her, but no one seemed to recognize the girl he spoke of. At last, his search brought him to a small roadside stall at the edge of the market. It was Dottie's shop. When she described Jesira to her, she immediately understood who he meant. Dottie agreed to guide Prince Emmanuel to Jesira's home. When they arrived, the prince did not step inside. Instead, he remained at the entrance of the compound, quietly watching as Jesira swept the yard with calm diligence. For a moment, he turned to Dottie and told her he would return later. With that, he departed for the palace, while Dottie made her way back to her little shop in the marketplace. 2 days later, the prince returned, this time accompanied by royal guards. Mirabella was puzzled when she saw the royal guards standing beside him in her home. Curious and excited, she hurried outside to greet them. But the royal messenger asked only one question.
Is Jesira here?
The silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. Mirabella quickly
Jesira?
replied, Jesira?
No one by that name lives
here. Just as she was speaking, Jesira walked into the compound, balancing a pot of water on her head. The prince saw her immediately. A wide smile spread across his face as he stepped forward and gently lifted the pot of water from her head. What happened afterward was not a fairy tale in this simple sense. Jesira did not become someone else when she entered the palace. Jesira and Prince Emmanuel got married the following spring in a ceremony that was simple and sincere. She was later able to go and further her education. Though unhappy, Mirabella and her daughters attended the wedding. She remained exactly who she had always been. A girl who understood hard work. A girl who knew how to care for others. A girl who had learned strength from surviving hardship. Prince Emmanuel did not choose her because she was beautiful. He chose her because she spoke with honesty in a world full of pretended smiles. Jesira wore her mother's bracelet and necklace. Philo had quietly returned it. Jesira never asked for revenge against Mirabella or her daughters.
Instead, she asked the king to strengthen laws protecting children in households where parents had remarried, because she knew there were many girls like her, sleeping in small rooms near smoky kitchens, waiting for someone to see them. The river in Edenmoor still turns gold at sunset. Some people change the world not by force, but simply by proving that kindness and strength can survive even the darkest circumstances. Jesira had always known her worth. She had only been waiting for the world to realize it.